Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. My name is Matthew. I'm one of your hosts. Joining me on the line is Jacob.
Hi, everyone. It's me again.
And today, folks, we're going to be talking about something you never hear us talk about, Daredevil. But there's two good reasons. First of all, Daredevil Season 3 is about to come out, and we're really excited, actually, to do a preview of this show, of the season that's to come. We've been talking. I think there's a lot of great topics that are ripe for us to dive into. The kind of questions that we're hoping to see explored in Season 3, things that we think haven't really been resolved from Seasons 1 and 2. And also because Jacob and I have realized that part of why we have kept bringing discussion about Daredevil and Kingpin into almost every possible conversation we could is that we've never actually gotten to sit down and just talk about Daredevil. It just keeps coming up for everything else. So maybe if we can kind of get all of it out of our system, we can sort of be ready to maybe not bring it up quite as much for other things, though I imagine it will still come up from time to time because, as we're going to talk about, it is such a paragon of the kind of questions this whole podcast gets into. So, Jacob, let me just start with how are you kind of feeling as we look to let me back up a second. Jacob, why do you think it is that we love Daredevil so much and that it keeps being brought up in this podcast?
Well, one of the reasons I feel like we latched onto it was the premiere, the pilot Netflix Marvel show. If you look through the topics that we reference most consistently, we're obviously very hot on the the Netflix Marvel shows in general. And it's because there's some consistency in their theming and they're framed really well. They deal with a lot more, I guess, down-to-earth issues than like the Avengers films do. So our heroes have to deal with real life. They have to deal with things being a bit messy, with having a secret identity in Matt Murdock's case, right? With the Matt Murdock Daredevil thing, and with Jessica Jones having to deal with her own trauma, right? They deal with these very personal things, and by and large, with some exceptions time and back, have very compelling, interesting villains. And I guess the Hand, I could also have fake coughed the Hand because it's also bad, which is a shame. Such a waste of Sigourney Weaver in that role. And I mean, I'm not that she didn't do an amazing job, but like they really should have explored that better. Anyway, moving on. I think the reason why we latch on to Daredevil specifically, though, is because his character is centered in this, like, so he's the hero that we want, right? He is he's got his flaws, he's got his demons. He is somebody who is just trying to do good. He's obviously, like, he struggles fiscally, he struggles with human relations sometimes. He has this sort of internal conflict as well as the external conflicts, and the bad guys of his storyline aren't always, super nefarious, and sometimes they're his allies. So, like, Stick is supposedly a mentor to him and is incredibly antagonistic in their relationship. So I feel like Daredevil just did so much to humanize superheroes in a way that we hadn't seen for a while, at least, leading up.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate, especially because, I mean, I think you feel somewhat this way, but I have very often talked about how The Dark Knight is probably my favorite bit of superhero media, if not in my top 5, in part because I think it frames some of the questions that I love so much so well. And I think for me, one of the things I really love about Daredevil is how much it jumps into the same questions, specifically about what is the line between justice and vengeance. What is the line between acting for your own personal motivations versus trying to actually do good? How do you decide when it's okay to break the law in order, the difference between law and justice? And those are all things that Batman wrestles with. And in different ways, those are all things that Matt Murdock wrestles with. And I think the combination of that, as well as you said, Kingpin being probably one of the best villains I think that we've had in all the MCU. Well, one of the best in the MCU. Mariah Dillard recently has made a very strong argument for her as well.
Stokes.
Such a good character.
Oh man, I love Mariah.
But as well as Cottonmouth was just phenomenal as well.
Love Cottonmouth.
But yeah, the point being, I think that those are both reasons why this show is one that really grabs us. And so with that, let's kind of talk about some of the things that we're really excited for going into season 3. The first of which, and I'll admit, I was just squeeing and fanboying so hard when I saw this in the preview. We're getting Kingpin back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's gonna be some good Daredevil, especially after he's had his time away. He's had his time to reflect, and he now knows what the Hand was up to, and that he was
Yeah.
being used. And I think there's a lot there that they can explore with his character. I would kind of like to see, um, I would love to see a narrative where he at some point ends up working with Matt Murdock, uh,
Interesting.
toward a particular goal that they share, because in some like there is a shared vision that the two of them have that they could align on, and I would find that particular storyline to be very fascinating. I mean, I always like it when the heroes have to team up with the villains, and I know it's a cliche at this point, but in this particular case, I feel like there's a really solid grounding for it.
No, I would agree with that, and I think in some ways, Magneto, Professor X share the idea of them both being part of an outsider group that Murdoch and Fisk don't. But I do think that there's the element to which, you know, both Professor X and Magneto both are looking at a problem in terms of an injustice, the way mutants are treated, and they're both trying to figure out how to solve it just using different methods. And I think as we talked about somewhat in the Fisk versus Punisher episode, that's exactly where that's the sort of axis on which Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk connect. Is that both of them look at Hell's Kitchen, a neighborhood they I think they both truly love, and they both want to help it. And there's kind of, to me, I think one of the things that makes Kingpin such a great character, and we talked about it a lot on that episode, so we don't want to go too deep, but it's worth mentioning, is that I think of all the villains we have seen, he is one of the ones who I am clearest that he has the most altruistic motives. His methods are where we really get into trouble, as well as like the gentrification aspect of what he's trying to do. But although you can call that a method as well. But I truly believe that he looks at Hell's Kitchen as a neighborhood he loves and cares for and wants to make it better.
I mean, I would argue that Mariah Stokes actually falls, especially given in season 2 of Luke Cage, falls along a very similar line. We don't see
Mm-hmm.
we don't have other examples, but I just want to push back just slightly on him being the only one in that particular case. All
So
right.
that's actually a good one to get into because I would say, and I think in a different way, this is what makes Mariah such a great character. I saw her as someone who isn't as purely altruistic because what I saw with her is someone who, you know, a large part of her loves and cares for the neighborhood so much. A large part of her also is fighting so hard against the shadow of her own mother, who claimed to love the neighborhood so much and really was just using it to fuck it over to hurt people, including Mariah herself for her own gain. My take on Mariah's character is that part of where she's really wrestling with trying to figure out how much of this is her own altruistic interest versus her sort of trying to deal with the demons of her past. Um, and so and maybe you don't see it that way, but I would see her as just as interesting in a different way. But they are kind of different from
I mean,
Kingpin.
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they're the same character, but in the same way, they do things that definitely cross a line beyond which I can't say, well, you're definitely like I can't call them heroic, right?
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure.
but there are things that Mariah does with the gains that she has gotten. So it's similar in the whole like trying to do good in some cases, but the way you get there is problematic. The way you like she got her money through criminal means. Kingpin's rise to power, similar themes there, right? Where
Right.
both of them came into power, came into the position to be this influential through ill-gotten gains, right? And from Mariah's perspective, I feel like she didn't think she had another choice in order to get there, and it's corrupted her along the way, which is not surprising, but it's a part of the character that makes her interesting. I guess you could also say the same thing for Fisk, though. I see again, they're clearly not the same character. There's a lot of differences there, but I feel
Right.
like in a lot of ways there's things to connect with there. There's things to identify with, and this is why we keep talking about the Netflix Marvel shows, because they keep giving us this good stuff.
For sure. No, and I definitely agree with you on that. And so let's get into the thing that you mentioned that I think is to me, one of the most interesting things about where Wilson Fisk is at the start of season 3, which is him kind of coming to the realization that he was somewhat a pawn of the hand. This is, and just a refresher for those who either haven't seen all of this or, and by the way, spoiler alert for everything Marvel Netflix that has ever been come out. Um, but what happens is all throughout season 1, I think in kind of a wonderfully ironic turn on his name, Kingpin is the one kind of moving all of these pieces around in terms of like Madame Gao and the Russians and the Japanese ninja whose name I completely am blanking on. It doesn't matter. But Kingpin seems to be the one moving them all around for his purposes. And as we get hints at in season 1 and really is revealed in season 2 and then in Defenders, all along they were the ones using Fisk for this thing that would actually be incredibly destructive to the neighborhood he was trying to save. And we've never seen anything about him being in jail realizing that, but I have to imagine, and I'm really hoping that we're going to start season 3 either with him already knowing that or with him coming to understand that and having to really wrestle with what does that mean for what he was trying to do.
It's Nobu, by the way.
Nobu,
And
thank
the
you.
only reason I didn't snap that off immediately was because I consume a lot of media that originates from Japan, and Nobunaga Oda is a character that is evoked a lot, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't just me conflating that character across
Fair.
multiple different properties. But yeah, it was in fact Nobu.
Okay.
Anyway, uh, talking to your point about and unfortunately, like there are good ways they could explore this, but it does mean they have to acknowledge the hand and the plot line surrounding the hand from Defenders
Yeah.
and the end of season 2 of Daredevil. And unfortunately, that is some of their weaker material, so I'm not sure what they're going to do about that. But I do think that if they explore it in sort of introspection, in sort of the like, he was trying so hard to be in control that he let himself be controlled, going to our devotion to a cause episode as a
Right.
callback to that idea. Or if he gets that realization, what does that do to a man like Wilson Fisk?
Right.
Probably makes him angry. So probably doesn't make him more in control, but maybe not. Maybe he'll find that stillness that Danny Rand is trying to impress to Luke Cage in Luke Cage season 2. I'm almost done with Luke Cage season 2, and I cannot wait to talk about it, guys. But
Oh,
I,
we're
I
gonna have
gotta
such a good
finish.
conversation about that. But yeah, I'll make sure to hold off on spoilers there. Not to
Mhm.
mention, and this I think is the first time I'm going to be truly surprised. I'm looking forward to talking with you about Iron Fist season 2 because it actually got pretty
I
darn good.
I tell you what, not to go too far off the beaten path here, but if the Danny Rand we saw in the episode of Luke Cage I just finished with is the Danny Rand we see in
hmm
in Iron Fist season 2, I am on board.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything else, but yeah, there's some really good directions it goes. But you're right. I think that's like something we haven't talked about with Fisk, but it makes him a really interesting part of his character is he's such this contrast. Although it makes sense when you think about it psychologically, he is the picture of the person who presents to the world as being, calm and kind of like the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. He
Hmm.
works so hard to look, respectable and to have the right paintings and the nice suit and things like that. But it is so clear that there is just so much repressed, built-up rage in him that, as we saw with this is sort of the dignified, in-control villain who I think still is at the top of the leaderboard for the most brutal death scene in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he took a guy's head off with a car door.
Hmm.
And to me, that's um, it's sort of one more interesting contrast in this character. And yeah, I'll be really interested to see, does this news make him fly into a rage, or does he sort of just turn all that inward? And especially, I wonder if he's going to blame himself. He seems in some ways a very self-reflective character. He spends so much time staring at the blank wall and thinking. And in season 1, he kind of has a meltdown when he has some idea of what others are doing. And I'm going to be really curious to see where he directs those feelings.
Yeah, and like there are a couple different ways I could see it going, but for me, one of the things that I'm curious how they're going to approach it is that Wilson Fisk was a character who, as you said, like he had that persona that he presented to the public, and it was a very respectable persona. Well, he's gone to jail now, right? He's done some time. So is he going to try to rebrand as as like the reformed criminal who's trying to undo and right his wrongs while still being while still being that guy who's doing the bad things all along? We've seen it done in media, and it can be done well. So like that's a possibility. Or is it you going to take an entirely different direction where now he feels he has to be more of a shadowy influencer rather than on the center stage?
Right. Well, especially because, and I'm going to be careful not to spoil anything, but at the end of Defenders, Matt Murdock says to Danny, protect my city.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a plot point in Iron Fist Season 2 that I'm not going to get into details on, but certainly Danny feels to some extent like he has to continue to carry Matt's mantle to protect the city, but he by no means seems to apply it to Hell's Kitchen specifically in any way. Like, he doesn't become the new version of the Devil of Hell's Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me think also that part of what Wilson Fisk will be coming back to is something of a vacuum in Hell's Kitchen. And I wonder if one of the things we're going to get to see explored is sort of both Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk coming back into a Hell's Kitchen that has had neither one of them in it for some time, and them both sort of taking a look at what's happened and where that could go.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add. I want to see it. Can we just like... I don't want to like fall asleep. I got things to do, but like I would like them to release it early, maybe. Although
12 days. We have 12 days.
Oh my goodness, I still haven't watched any Iron Fist. Okay, anyway.
Someone who I'm also really looking forward to, I hope is going to return, because I thought she was such an interesting character, both in how she relates to Fisk and in her own right, is Vanessa.
Yeah.
I loved the character of Vanessa because I think we saw so much more of Fisk's human side, but also because, we often talk about how the villain always believes they're the hero of their own story. And sometimes that kind of stretches credulity, because you're sort of like, doesn't everyone else around you see that you're a villain? And what I love is that Vanessa is 100, like, in Vanessa's mind, she is the love interest in the Kingpin hero story. She 100% believes that Fisk is the hero and Daredevil is the villain. And I loved that about her, because I loved the perspective that she brings of that, yeah, this isn't cut and dry. A lot of people would probably see Wilson Fisk as a hero. I mean, a lot of people, even in today's world, like the debates we have about gentrification, whether or not that's a good thing or bad, and the means by which people can do things to clean up neighborhoods and deal with crime. I think if there was a real life Wilson Fisk, there'd be a lot of real life Vanessas.
Yeah, so one direction I would like to see them go is that, as you said, there's a power vacuum that's existed now in Hell's Kitchen for some period of time. I'm almost wondering if Vanessa picked up where Fisk left off, and this is more like plot speculation, but I would really like to see a story where Vanessa has been sort of carrying on, and then when Fisk comes back, she's still, she can actually be in the public, she can be a public persona, and they're kind of like working together, but now the relationship is different, because now she's in the thick of it and has like, basically I actually want to see her with like more agency and more, not that she didn't have agency, but more like of a hand in what they're doing, and have it be less about like, this is Fisk's show and she's a supporting character in terms of his agenda, and more that they're two sides of a coin, right?
So I wonder if you had this feeling when we got to the end of season 1 of Daredevil. I think I'm right about this. I believe she was in a white suit, like a white pantsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be wrong about that, but there were a couple of other details that made me think that there was a possibility that what they were setting up was that she was going to be Kingpin instead of Wilson Fisk.
Yep.
And I was really on board for that. And I was I was very disappointed that we didn't get her at all in season 2. And so, yeah, what you're talking about, like seeing that she has been not just kind of hero worshiping him, but saying, okay, well, if he can't do it, I have to pick up the mantle and become what he was trying to be. I don't think we're going to get that, unfortunately, but I would really love to see that storyline.
I mean, especially if she realized that the hand, for lack of a better way of putting it, was poisonous
Yeah.
early on, and cut ties and started just trying to work, on the DL until they got out of the picture. Because that then she could have established a really organized and, very nice, tightly woven web with nobody actively disrupting, and so it could have like put a new foundation for center of power in Hell's Kitchen again, under, I guess, the Fisk brand, the Kingpin brand,
Yeah.
right?
Well, especially because that could kind of go in two different ways. It could be that, and so Wilson gets out, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you've learned all these things, and let's work together." I could also, though, see her being like, "Wilson, you've fallen off the pedestal for me because now that I see how much you were being duped, that she's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
soured on him a little bit, and maybe now there's some conflict between the two." We're now deep into just pure plot speculation, but I think that I think again because it gets into this fundamental dichotomy at the heart of most of the villains we love, which is that they don't realize that they are becoming the things that they hate. And Matt Murdock actively knows that that's a danger, and he's fighting it as hard as he can. I think in part because he sees someone like Wilson Fisk has succumbed to that. And I'd love to see, Wilson Fisk and Vanessa either reconciling or in conflict over those questions about which one of them thinks that they are still pure versus going in the wrong directions.
Right.
So let's kind of get or actually, did you have anything more on Vanessa or Fisk?
No, not anymore on Vanessa or Fisk. Only to say that, like, obviously we're going to see both of the characters again, and I'm kind of hoping that what we see is more of a, because again, Vanessa was really portrayed in mostly a supportive role of Fisk, in like
Right.
sort of as a lens for us to view him differently through when she was around, and that has some, as an ethical point, that has some problems in portrayal in media that I'm not exactly comfortable with. So I would like her to be her own person more. If that makes sense. I feel like,
No, it does. I mean, she's a very useful foil to him, but in being a foil, she's sort of the every person we've talked before about how like the everyman character that is the audience stand-in.
mm-hmm.
I think on some level she's supposed to be a version of the audience stand-in. I just got a message telling me to remember that I'm supposed to record with you right now. But I think she's supposed to be the audience stand-in for how it is that someone could be seduced by Fisk. Not literally, but like taken in by his idea. And you're right that it's an interesting character, but it kind of denies her some of her own agency. And yeah, I would love to see more of that. I admit you're more optimistic than I am. I don't think by any means it's guaranteed that Netflix is going to go back to her, because I think honestly, as good as Netflix has been, one of the areas where it has really fallen down is on continuity sometimes. So I'm afraid that they are just going to like say a one or two line about how he's sad that she realized how dangerous things were and went back to Italy or France or whatever. I hope they're not going to do that, but I would not be surprised if they did.
So sort of moving on, from I mean, as we've done before, we can talk for a very long time about Wilson Fisk specifically, but there's another piece. This has to do with the end of Defenders, and it's something that it's just rampant in Marvel stories, and it's not surprising to me that they're doing it here. But so Matt Murdock, defo died at the end of Defenders.
Yep.
Except that he didn't. And so there's some issues with that whole execution, but just as an idea about something I'd like to talk for a bit about is when our heroes are free from the consequences of death. So when they make a sacrifice, but we know they're not going to die, it doesn't. It's not the same moment. It's not really a
Yeah.
sacrifice then, and it sort of cheapens the act, if that makes sense.
It does, and I'll admit I'm a little sorry that Paul isn't with us because, well, I think he sometimes agrees with us on that trope. He often disagrees, especially on the one that for me started it the most in the Marvel universe, and that still rankles me the most, which is the fact that Tony lives at the end of the first Avengers movie,
Hmm.
because, and I think it's exactly what you're saying. Is to me what he is doing in that moment is being willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. And Tony Stark had been established in both that movie and in the Iron Man movies that had come before as being someone who was primarily self-focused and not able, that he's really much he's a raving narcissist. He's a
Hmm.
narcissist with a lot of great ideas and who can do a lot of good, but he's very self-focused. And for him to make this act of extreme, ultimate sacrifice, I thought was incredibly powerful. And I now remember that most of Avengers I think is a great movie, but the first time I saw it, I was actually really upset by it because I was so angry that he lived at the end because I thought that was so cheapened. And I, to me, Netflix, I could sort of see it as it's the comic books, and in comic books, no one ever dies, and the MCU is still the PG-13 version of all of this. But Netflix is the R-rated stuff, and their death should matter, and as much as I would be saddened to lose Matt Murdock, I thought his death under that building was one of the best parts of Defenders and was such a good, they'd kind of written the character into a corner, and we'll talk about that more, but they'd taken him into such a dark direction that in some level, having him die there, I thought would be a perfect ending. And you're right, it just felt so cheap when we showed that, nope, he's alive in a Catholic hospital.
Right. And the problem I'm especially having is that you know that all of the people that worked with Matt in Defenders were affected by his death and have sort of done things to move on and to honor that sacrifice. And he just at some point he kind of has to come back and be like, "Hi guys, just
Yeah.
kidding, everything's fine." And
I,
like it's very difficult to write that moment and have it like play well at all.
I will say, not to be too critical, but that one of my biggest complaints about some of the more recent series is that I felt like they haven't dealt with the events of of Defenders very much. So I'm not quite like I kind of wish we'd gotten a lot more of Jessica and Luke and Danny and how they're dealing with. Well, Danny we do get a lot, but of Jessica and Luke we get a little bit, but not as much as I'd want. But certainly, yeah, you're right. Is that I don't know what happens because especially because one of the things that the shows have have set up in the season 2 of all of these, or at least the post Defender seasons, and I'm disappointed by this, is that even though they were all in the Defenders, they're not all showing up in each other's stories that much. They're sort of popping in every now and then, but Jessica Jones is about Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage, Danny shows up for a little bit, and I imagine that Daredevil season 3 is going to be the same. And I think that's going to feel wrong because, as you said, an essential part of Matt Murdock being back to life has to be him reconciling, or not even reconciling, but him reconnecting with the people who fought with him and thought he died.
Right. And like so one thing that they could have done if they had really played with the continuity was to have Matt Murdock be one of the people. They can't do this anymore because they've definitely written things post Defenders. But they could have had Matt Murdock be one of the people that got snapped out and then gets
Mm,
rewritten and tie it into the Avengers line movies, and then he's part of the grand resurrection. And it's like then okay, whatever. It's a pleasant surprise, I guess. But they can't do that anymore. So like now we have to have two different like let's undo all of these death things.
yeah, and I'll admit that's for me, and this is again a little bit of a different topic, but I think this is a good time to mention it. When I saw the snapshot, it hit me really hard at the end of Infinity War. And there's a part of me that was thinking, okay, but clearly it's all going to be undone. And then I realized, wait, but we have a year for that to happen. And I was like, okay, they're going to make this feel more real if we really get to see a year of the post-Snapshot world in all these other Marvel products that are coming out. And the fact that they just haven't done that with any of them, including with the Netflix shows, which are all set in New York City, where
Yep.
so much of the Infinity War battle happened, I think is a real disappointment and really undercuts the power of the end of it. I still think Infinity War was a great movie, but honestly, with every Marvel property that comes out where the Snapshot isn't mentioned, I lose a little bit of my love for Infinity War.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up because that's bothered me a lot too. There's all this potential that they could have had for writing stories where it's like, people talking with you just, our heroes talking with people who come to them with problems and being all like, "Look, I lost like my uncle in the event," and like they'd have a name for it and they could write whole like, people are in mourning and people have like cult movements and stuff that crop up because of it. Like there's so much material that you could
Yeah.
farm from such a huge cataclysmic event like that really would affect our heroes' lives and create some really good stories, and we're just not doing it. We're just not even going to touch it.
Yeah, and kind of tying it back to where we started originally, I think it's, to me, one of the things that, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, and Logan and I especially talked about this in our episode on the Logan movie. My friend Logan, who talked with me about Logan, the movie about the Wolverine character. One of the things that I often find troubling ethically about a lot of action movies is the idea that they present violence that doesn't really have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And so when things show me that no, things have consequences, that, you ride bravely into battle, someone might die, and that might really affect everyone. Someone might, be injured and not be able to keep doing what they were doing because now they're a fundamentally different, physical being, because of some kind of injury or something like that. And so I guess in the Defenders especially, like I thought, as dark as it would be, I thought, like, what an incredible story to go forward with 3 Defenders haunted by the death of the person who'd kind of brought them together. And yeah, so to lose that, I thought was just a really disappointing thing.
And it's also annoying that so far I've seen Jessica and Luke Cage showed up in Jessica Jones, and Danny Rand's shown up in Luke Cage, and in those episodes, I'm pretty sure nobody mentioned Matt dying.
There's a brief mention. I think Danny says something to Luke, and I think Jessica at one point says something to Trish about like, or Trish says something to Jessica about like, what did Matt die for or
Oh
something.
yeah,
But
okay. So there's a
but you're
nod
right.
to it, but
It's a very brief nod, and not that Jessica's got quite a lot of her own trauma. Thank you very much. She's the one who I think I could most sort of be like, all right, the guy stole my scarf, he died, life goes on. But like, I would think Luke would carry that to some extent. I certainly think Danny would carry it to some extent, and I just feel like maybe we'll just get a Daredevil season completely on its own, and then I think that's still going to be really good. But I think I'm going to be a little saddened if we get this story about Matt's death and resurrection, which to be honest, I love that he's a Christian character. I am so sick of resurrection, and as a Christian myself, I am so sick of resurrection motifs. So I really hope they don't lean into that at all. But yeah, I do think his reconciling or reconnecting with the Defenders will be important, and especially even if it's not them, Foggy and Karen were 2 people who are clearly so affected by his death.
mm-hmm.
I really hope we're going to see more of that.
But
And
in order for us to see Foggy and Karen in Matt Murdock's show about Matt Murdock starring Matt Murdock, we probably have to see them interacting, which means like, yeah, that's going to be an emotional thing, but it's very rare that that's executed well if you understand what I mean, where
mm-hmm.
like we'll have a reunion scene, as it were, right? And then they'll be angry and they'll go through the 5 stages of grief all over again. But generally speaking, that's it, and we're done after that point. And it just
Right.
like again, I guess maybe I just want so much more catharsis, and you can call me an edgelord if you want, but I want more of like, no, somebody died. This matters. Let's feel it.
Well, especially because this is a good way to get into this. Um, when we got to the end of the Defenders, Matt was not in a good relationship place with either Foggy or Karen.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's kind of pick up with there. First of all, just putting aside his death, what were your thoughts on sort of the direction those relationships had taken?
So I was honestly most crushed by Matt and Foggy being at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's actually parallels very strongly the Jessica Trish thing, where
Yeah.
I don't like seeing good friendships get torn down for reasons that's really one person's fault.
Right.
Um, and that maybe that's in part because I've been, in those situations myself, and they weren't very good for me either. But like there's this thing where they had been working together for so long. When we come in, when we meet up with them, they'd already established a strong foundational relationship between those two. Um, and when Karen came in, it didn't divide them. Like, and so like I guess it's all upsetting because I also really was enjoying where Karen and Matt's relationship was going. Um,
Yeah.
and I just really love Karen's actress a lot. In her role in Punisher, in her role moving forward in the show, and I hope we see more of her. So to sort of leave Matt's connection with both of them in such a damaged place, and then have him die, and so like they never get that closure. Now what does he do? Like how does he reconnect with them? Like how does that happen?
Yeah, and I think the same way. Like, I'm sad about him and Karen, but in some way it kind of makes sense because as we're going to talk about, I feel like he sort of felt he had to make a choice between Karen and Elektra, and I don't like the choice, but I think I understand where that character makes it. But for me, one of the things that I loved so much about season one, it's something you and I have talked about so often, like male-male friendship
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of showing that in good ways. And it was such a vital part of season one. Even to the extent of like Foggy finding out about, well, does he find out he's Daredevil in season one or season? No, he finds out in season one,
Mm.
and it obviously strains their friendship, but they still find ways through it. Um, and especially as you brought up, like it is such a trope that two men are good friends, and then a pretty woman comes along,
Yep.
and they both like her, but she only likes one of them. I love that they avoided that trope entirely. And I thought, okay, good, we're gonna have a solid, friendship here. And the way they've taken it has just been so disappointing to me.
Well, and
And
I hope that we see more Foggy Karen scenes in Daredevil season 3 where it's the two of them
yes,
interacting and they're not just talking about Matt, some kind of like weird superhero based Bechdel test thing, I guess. But like not to admonish that or diminish that in any way. That's a real thing. I'm just saying like
right.
as a joke, but we have many Foggy and Karen scenes before Matt died where they interacted and they did not talk about Daredevil or Matt Murdock at all, right?
Hmm.
They were dealing with some other problems in Hell's Kitchen. Like they were also being heroes. Like
Right.
everybody on that 3-person team was a hero in that show, and I want to see that kind of revisited. And there's just no way to do that. I feel like unless I guess what they could do is they could have Matt Murdock like come back but only show himself in the area as like another masked costume looking hero, and they're all like, how is the Devil of Hell's Kitchen back? Can't be Matt, who's doing this? And like
Well, and there I think I am a little different than you because I agree that I like those two characters separate from Matt and would like to see some of that. But I think one of the things that is so interesting to me is that they are in this place that I think is really dramatically interesting of someone who you loved very much and were also incredibly angry at has died without, like you said, a chance to have the catharsis for that anger. And clearly they're both heartbroken about his death. I think they're also going to have very different reactions to the like 'cause both of them were sort of upset about what he was doing as Daredevil, and I can imagine both of them having so many complicated feelings about how they felt about Matt, and I think I would like to see some of them processing that together. Even if, either if it's them supporting each other or them being in conflict because they have very different reactions to it. But I agree with you. I want some of the Matt Murdock Bechdel test, of them talking about other things. But I could see that, like, for the first couple of episodes, Matt is healing and recovering. I don't think that he steps out of the hospital in episode 1. I think, or at least I hope, that the first maybe episode or two are scenes of him recovering while the rest of the world is dealing with the loss of Matt Murdock in Daredevil. And I would really like to see some of Karen and Foggy dealing with that, especially because my hope, and maybe I'm being, Pollyanna-ish here, but like you said, I would really like them to get the catharsis, and I don't know if we can do this, but I want Avocados of Law at Law back by the end. I think one of my only real disappointments from season 1 was that they broke up the law firm, and that was such an important part of the comics that I really hope we get back to it.
Yeah. And part of that means that at some point Matt Murdock has to, so I feel like Matt as a character will not be able to sit there and let them continue to believe he's dead when obviously he knows better. I'm hoping they don't go the whole amnesia route, but that's a possibility. That's so tired, right? Like I said,
I want nothing to do with that.
I heard your eyes rolling, but like it is a possibility. Is definitely within the wheelhouse. Like this is it's a common trope where somebody's back, but they don't remember who they were. They don't remember the mission or their people or the people, and so that gives them an excuse to. Because I think if he knows, right, if he's fully aware, and he chooses to let them continue thinking he's dead, I just can't think there's a universe where that's okay.
Yeah, especially because we've literally already had that plot line with Elektra.
Yep.
And I just don't want it again. He's been declared legally dead, so this might get into real complications, but one of the things that I liked about the character so much in season 1 that I think they really got away from in season 2 is the idea that he was the lawyer by day, the daredevil by night, and that he was fighting justice in both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And am I right? We don't get any kind of real courtroom scene we have a little bit at the beginning when he has the disabled character, and I loved that, but for the most part, there's very little legal drama in season 2. Am I right about that?
In season 2, yes. In Defenders, we actually got more.
Yeah.
And so Defenders had a better portrayal of Matt Murdock, both as Matt Murdock and as Daredevil, because he was playing both aspects of his role. But I agree with you that the most compelling Daredevil is a Daredevil where we get to see both of those aspects play out. And
right.
So I would love for one of the early parts of the season to be him, trying to get his living status back.
Yeah.
As what do you mean you seized my assets or whatever? I'm here. That's mine.
Well, and yeah, and especially because, and again, here I'm pie in the sky. I think this continuity train has been lost. But one of the things that I think is so great about Daredevil in the comics is that Daredevil is very wrapped up with the whole Civil War plot line because he's the lawyer who's representing some of these heroes, in legal challenges to, I don't think there's Sokovia Accords in the comics, but whatever those accords are.
Right.
And we've talked about how but the shows have been mentioning Sokovia Accords and things like that, and I would love if, again, this is maybe my pie in the sky, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I would really like it if the kind of, he reconnects with Foggy and Karen, there's a lot of catharsis, there's a lot of fighting, and to some extent, at the end of it, he's like, okay, guys, you're right, maybe I should be trying to work more in the criminal justice system and not putting on the mask, and then as the season develops and whatever happening at Fisk happens, we start to get more of the tension of him thinking, can he just be the lawyer, or does he have to put the mask back on? I don't know if we'll get that, but I think that's a storyline that could be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to. I don't know if they're going to give us that or not. But I agree with you that It's tough because there's only so much that they can do within a particular season. What I
Right.
don't want is another half season of like really good, really compelling stuff like they did with Punisher, and then just I got to be honest, I didn't actually like the Elektra plot line kind of at all.
Neither did
Um,
I.
and I would like
To
them
be
to.
clear, just to be clear for our, I think I know what you mean, but you're saying the half of the season of Daredevil that involved Punisher, not that there was one half of Punisher that was good
Right.
and one half that
Right,
wasn't.
right,
Right.
right,
Okay.
right, correct. The first half of Daredevil season 2, because the second half of Daredevil season 2 focused on Elektra in the Hand, and like I like the character of Elektra. I didn't like that storyline. It just felt
Yeah.
really kind of linear, kind of one-dimensional to me, and that wasn't what I go. That's not what I go to my Netflix shows for. It's the same reason I have a
Yeah.
problem with the Diamondback portion of season 1 of Luke Cage, because Cottonmouth was just a way more compelling villain, and it was a much more interesting story. And it, like, yes, I liked that we got the background, the
Yeah.
backstory of Luke during that time. Like during that second half of the season, they explored his origin, where he came from, his family. But I feel like season 2 does a much better job of exploring his family by bringing his father into it. But
No,
that's a topic for another podcast. Sorry, I just
yeah.
like it's fresh on my mind because I just got done watching another episode. I'm like, man, I want to
Finish
talk
that
about it.
episode, and we've got our next episode for ourselves.
Yep.
Um, but no. We promise our next episode is not going to be Marvel related. More on that later. Um, but you're right, and I think especially, well, first of all, in the list of bad Marvel Netflix villains, there's not many, but Cottonmouth is near the top of that list, and Zombie Ninjas
You
and
mean
Mindless.
Diamondback's top of that list, not
Oh
Cottonmouth?
no, yeah, Cottonmouth's fantastic. Diamondback is probably near the top of the bad villains list, and unfortunately, mindless hordes of zombie ninjas is pretty close second.
Yep.
Um, so I'm with you on the Electro thing, but the other thing, and kind of tying it back, especially to where this podcast is coming from, to me, a really big part of the Electra storyline is Matt Murdock having, like I said, it's the Karen versus Electra. And to some extent it's his future versus past, but a lot of it is um Electra. At the start of season 2, Daredevil is very opposite of the Punisher. And my take at least is that Electra, I think the Punisher would think Electra's got the right idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a big part of him choosing Electra in season 2 was about him kind of leaning towards the Punisher and saying maybe the Punisher's right. And I I understand that storyline, but it's certainly not the one I would have wanted him to take.
Right.
Like, am I thinking too much
And
into this, or do you
well,
see it the same way?
no, although he didn't lean into that too strongly either. Like there's still, even during Defenders, he was clearly like trying to, or at least paying words to preserving lives, except for when it came to the Hand, who were, I guess, trying to achieve immortality because like reasons influencing society. It was a bad story.
Yeah,
Because it was basically the Batman Begins story, right? We are the people who undermine your civilizations, and that whole thing, and we're so evil because we keep going, and we keep going because we're immortal or whatever. And like, anyway, the 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 problem there is that I don't really feel like that's the choice that Matt made. I feel like Matt made the choice to be with Elektra because he felt like he could fix Elektra. Like
mm,
you know what I'm saying? Not,
yeah,
fix is a loaded term in this case, but it's that whole like I feel very strongly for you. I have hormonal feelings for you, and I want to change you to be the person I feel you can become. Um,
right.
and especially like all the way leading up to the end of Defenders, he stuck with that, and I feel like that's where he was going with it. Not that he thought that Elektra's path was the right one, and that Punisher might have had a point, but he wanted to be present so that he could be hopefully the influence to change her. Which is, if you've ever heard anything about people being in relationships where they're all like, well, I'm trying to change them, I'm trying to make them better, that's obviously incredibly loaded and very
Right.
problematic.
No, and I I like that take on it more, especially because there's one of the other psychological things that often happens is you try to save someone from something because you're worried that you're that thing yourself, and so you're worried that you're that thing yourself, and so convincing yourself that they can be saved means that you can be saved. And certainly Matt Murdock's fear has always been, since the beginning of season 1, that he would be the Punisher. And so, yeah, I can see that idea that he is trying to save Elektra.
Well, that's a really good point, that he sees those darker aspects of himself in Elektra.
Right.
And so, like, he needs Elektra to be redeemable, to be able to bring her back into the light, to show that there's an escape path for him as well. I really dig that. Yeah.
Because I don't remember all of Daredevil Season 2 so much, and my dedication to this podcast is high, but I'm probably not rewatching that anytime soon. But my memory is that although you're right, I do think he is trying to pull her away, that he's also somewhat tempted. I mean, tempted by her in general, and his feelings for her, and his love for her, and his attraction to her. But also that to some extent, like, she's making a very similar argument to the Punisher, but she's making it in a way that he finds more appealing. In part because of his interactions with the Punisher first, so having stayed with him. But I agree with you that I think he is telling himself that he's trying to save her, but I think some part of him is in doubt, and that's also part of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you think that storyline's going to go? Because my memory is that both he and Elektra die. They're both theoretically died under that building at the end. And she was the Black Sun at that point, so she's even more. I mean, again, problems with season 2. They never really explain what that means, but my take on it is that she's kind of immortal, or somewhat like that. So if he lived, I think she has to have lived. We said that they might write Vanessa off. There's no way they can write Elektra off, is there? I mean, she's got to be a part of this, don't you think?
So here's what they're going to do. At the end of every episode of Daredevil, we're going to cut to underneath the rubble, and Elektra's going to be moving another inch up, and then another inch up. That would be terrible. That's not what they're going to do. But I think you're right that I think the writers have written themselves to the point where they can't abandon the Elektra character. I would like, actually, for that particular event to sort of restore her humanity, because at that point, like, this is one of my biggest problems with Defenders, is that Elektra was, a reasonable human being right up until a certain point during that plot line, and then all of a sudden it's like somebody flipped a switch, and now she's just a amoral murder machine, and I just don't get it. Right? I don't understand what is happening with the character mentally. So if they bring her back, like, we need to explore her psychology in some way. Like, show us her early childhood, show us some stuff that got her to where I can believe this character is not just a caricature of, ooh, this is the bad tempting thing that Matt needs to stay away from because it's the dark or whatever.
Well, I think, and I I agree with you, they did not make this clear at all in Defenders. But my understanding is that she dies at the end of when does she die? I think she dies at the end of Daredevil season 2.
Correct.
But that when Sigourney Weaver's character brings her back to life, that's the moment when there's a switch, and it's not. She is a fundamentally different person. She's now the Black Sun, kind of living in Elektra's body.
Right, and she has some memories and connections, and so she stays her hand at some points, but she's like possessed by something, or I don't know. Yeah.
Right, because then again, it's that idea of like the amnesia and the memory, and I agree with you. I get where he's coming from, and I think you have put a better spin for me on Matt Murdock trying to save Elektra, but I really hope we're done with that. I really hope that, I would like to see her continue, although she's not my favorite character, and so I certainly wouldn't mind if the two of them had some kind of catharsis and then she left. But certainly I do hope we get her back somewhat of, the person who was, because again, I don't think there's a hero-villain binary. I think there's a line in all sorts of ways, but especially on the, Matt Murdock to the Punisher to Wilson Fisk to and Elektra falls somewhere in there, and it's a 5-dimensional line. But I do think that Elektra and Punisher, to me, honestly, where I want to see Elektra go, I'd love to see Elektra on season 2 of Punisher.
I was going to say the exact same thing when you stopped talking. So yes,
Yeah.
agree. Exactly there. I think that's because, and not because they align. Actually, it's more because she would then be showing Punisher, here's what the path you're going down. Here's where it can lead. You can get into all kinds of bad things, and then Punisher actually having to be the one to say, hey, no, that's not okay. Which it would be a different place for him.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know which one would be saying it more to the other, because
Mm-hmm.
I think they're both in that gray area
Yep.
between right and wrong in different ways, and I think they could be teaching each other and conflicting with each other a lot. But yeah, so getting back to that, I would like to see I would like to see something happen with Elektra. Plot wise, I don't think it makes any sense if she's dead. I don't think it makes any sense that Matt is alive, but either way,
Maybe their connection with each other is what kept Matt alive, and then he got teleported into a hospital because of his faith. I can't. I don't even know. Like, we're gonna get fed some line, and we're gonna have to accept it.
Yeah. The idea of Daredevil and his secret identity you brought up earlier, and that is one kind of question that I've always had about this show that I was wondering what your thoughts on, which is the secret identity plotline is an interesting one, but it's also kind of a cliche at this point. Not kind of, it's very much a cliche. Especially all the ethical questions that it raises and stuff. And I recently rewatched the first Iron Man movie, and I was thinking about how much it set the tone for the entire MCU, both movies and TV. One thing I was really struck by was remembering that at the very end, he just blows away the whole concept of the secret identity. He says, yeah, I'm Tony Stark and I'm Iron Man. And that is now pretty much set for most of those movies. Like, the fact that Scott Lang is Ant-Man, not many people know, but, no one has any doubts that Steve Rogers is Captain America and Thor is Thor. Everyone knows that. Bruce Banner is the Hulk, and most people don't know that. But we don't really see much of Bruce Banner interacting with the world and hiding the Hulk. We did in the Hulk movie, but we've never gone back to it. What's your take on the idea that, like, in the Netflix shows we do get these secret identity plots, where, or at least with him, because Jessica Jones, it's pretty clear, everyone knows who she is, everyone knows who Luke Cage is, most people know that Danny Rand is the Iron Fist. Why do you think it is that the secret identity of Matt Murdock is so important?
So, part of it is because Matt Murdock was operating outside the law and within the law. I think, like,
right.
The fact that he was a defense attorney, like, he would lose a lot of credibility if they knew that he was, like, he loses every single court case if the prosecution can come to him and say, hey, here's all these extra legal things you've been doing, you probably should drop your case, right? So
right. He has a lot more to lose than either Luke Cage or Jessica Jones does in that sort of respectability idea.
Right. But, and like, so the typical reasoning we're given in superhero stories behind having the secret identity is it helps protect the people that you are personally connected with, your original persona, not your superhero persona, are connected with, from the consequences of your actions as a superhero. If they don't know that you care about Karen Page, right, then the villains don't know to go mess with Karen Page to try to get to you, or mess with Foggy to try to get to you. Jessica Jones solves that problem by not having connections with other people. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The one time she does in season 2, or I mean, she has a connection with Trish, and she does get into trouble for that, but she's also like, Trish can take care of herself, and then there's this whole other thing happening. But she has the connection with her mother, and that actually causes severe problems for her. Luke Cage, he has some connections, but there's not. With Luke, no one tries to get at him through his personal connections, which I'm surprised no one's tried to, like, get at him through his father at this point.
Yeah.
Now that that's surfaced, because that's definitely an angle that, for example, Mariah could pursue. And again, I haven't finished Luke Cage season 2, so if that actually happens, now everybody knows where I'm at in the show.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that yet. And with Danny Rand, he doesn't have those kinds of connections with people. He has with Colleen Wing, who is damn capable of taking care of herself. So like that's not a thing.
Right.
It's only Matt Murdock who we see have these connections with people who are, they're not those kinds of heroes. Foggy and Karen Page aren't those kinds of heroes who, when subjected to situations of extreme violence, are capable of handling it in that way. Although Karen, one could argue, has shown herself capable of doing that, provided that she has access to a firearm. Right?
Right.
Whereas Foggy, folds every time like a house of cards.
Yeah. Well, no, doesn't Foggy shoot someone at the end of Defenders or
Does
do
he? Did I
something
miss
violent?
that? I feel like he would have a problem with that.
I thought there was kind of like a similar, because I mean I have always thought that that's one of my favorite parts of Daredevil season one. I mean, talk about consequences. Karen Page makes probably
Mm-hmm.
one of the most justified self-defense shootings you can imagine in Daredevil season one, and she's haunted by it.
Yep.
And I loved that idea of you can kill someone for the most justified reasons, and a lot of people are going to have trouble sleeping at night, you know?
Yep.
And yeah, so I think that'd be interesting to explore. I don't, again, it's, why did Daredevil season two have to be so bad?
Only
The
half of
second
it.
half of it, at least,
Only
only
half of
half.
it.
You're right, but it leaves me that there's a lot of things that I just don't remember as well.
Right. And same with Defenders. But yeah, so there's this. So I think the secret identity question. Getting back to it, um, I feel like part of it, honestly, and this is stepping entirely out of the ethics discussion. It's got to do with the budget. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot like they know that the movies are going to have a lot of, high octane action scenes with explosions and things that are way difficult to button down and hide under wraps. Matt Murdock does his fighting in a hallway, but Tony Stark and Thor, they do their fighting in the middle of New York City for all to see, right? You can't really
Right.
mask what's going on there. Um, and it's because they can afford to do those kinds of really big scenes with lots of property damage and explosions and all that nonsense in the shots. And so in those movies, if they had to dealing with secret identity stuff is like, that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on like the big high impact stuff, high octane stuff. Um,
Right.
or we want the person who we're dealing with to be very, very small, and so nobody can actually see them doing these things. In the case of
Well,
Ant-Man.
and again, it's one more way that I'm so sad that we don't have the snapshot taking place in this world. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have that continuity because you know, how great would it be? Let's say Matt actually did survive this. What if the snapshot happened while Matt's in that hospital and he's kind of waking up and coming back into that world to see that it's all happened, and now he's kind of faced with people being like, "Wait a minute, like." Half the human population is gone. Most of the fighting with these horrible aliens, at least half of it, took place right here in New York City. Do you think we care who's wearing a mask, like while
Mm-hmm.
beating up like low-level street thugs? Like,
Yep.
I mean, what a great moment of perspective that would have been. But no, we're not going to get that. So anyway, I did have that on the agenda. Is Matthew gives his mini rant about continuity, and I've kind of just put it in a couple of times here and there, so we can check that off the list.
I
But
mean, I'm right there with you. Obviously, like again, I feel like the stories would have been far more interesting if we actually just dealt with it. I was really excited after Avengers Infinity War, being like, oh man, what's Jessica Jones gonna be like? What's the tone of Luke Cage gonna be like when a bunch of people have just
yeah,
up and vanished? Like, I know these shows are on the slate before part two of Infinity War part two, and I'm like, man, that's gonna be good. And then they just no, we're setting it before all that happened. Like,
yeah,
it feels
and
like
it
such
just
a miss.
Well, and it's like you said, it's and I do think it's an ethical thing too, because it goes again to this idea of there not being any real consequences,
Yes,
and that just
exactly.
that Tony taking Peter Parker with him. I mean, yeah, Peter he didn't want to, but like um eh, you know, I'm sure we're gonna get a little bit of it in not season two, but in Infinity War Part Two, we're gonna get some scenes of Tony dealing with Peter Parker not being gone or being dead, being ashed before Peter comes back. But and that'll be somewhat satisfying. But you're right. I would have loved to see just how the whole world is so different.
And you want to
Go
talk
ahead.
about the problem with the disposable characters trope, right? Where like, oh, these people don't matter, so we can kill them. Like Thanos literally wiped out half of humanity as part of his thing. We're given to understand, and by not addressing it in anything, in any of the media that were being put out, we're effectively saying those lives don't matter. They're not important
Yeah.
enough to tell that story. And it just I have a huge problem with that. Like it means it makes it meaningless, right? It doesn't matter. The deaths have no impact other than the named characters that we're going to care about in our next movie. And I just feel like that's really bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think clearly those deaths are going to have meaning in the next Avengers property.
Yeah.
And like 20 years ago, that's fine. I don't expect anyone in Star Trek to care about Star Wars because they're different worlds. And 20 years ago, if someone died in Gotham in the Michael Keaton Batman movies, I wouldn't expect that to in any way affect what was happening with the Superman movies because they were two different worlds in the movies, even though they weren't in comic books. But what Marvel has tried to do is to say, no, all of these worlds are connected. And yeah, that's what I just think. Like, if the worlds are connected and you have something with really powerful ethical and emotional and all of these implications happen in one part of your world, if you don't show it in the other parts, you really don't have the expanded universe you're claiming to.
I felt like we were going to get it because they talked about in was it Daredevil season 1 where they talked about the thing that happened in New York, and they talked about the impact of it and how New York's shaken because of the events of Avengers. And so I thought
Oh,
for
I mean, yeah,
sure we were going to keep doing that connection.
the entire plot of Daredevil season 1 revolves around the construction contracts to
Yep.
rebuild New York after the Avengers, and that was so brilliant.
So good.
Yeah. So let's try to. I think it's kind of funny that we spent so much time, over the last 2 years talking about how much we love Daredevil, and instead today we've mostly talked about our problems with the Snapshot and Daredevil season 2. But let's kind of end on a more positive note. What are some of the things you're really looking forward to? We talked about Luke Cage, Iron Fist somewhat. It comes down to specifics, but what are other general things you're really looking forward to seeing in season 3 of Daredevil?
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing. I guess I want to see who all they bring in, who all of the cast of characters they bring in to interact with the now newly minted, fresh from the pack Matt Murdock, because
Right.
he can't be the same character who went down the however many floors into the skeleton of Shaolin or whatever in the heck it was. Was Shaolin the name of the dragon? Whatever. Who went down into that area and done got dieted. He's
Yeah.
got to be somebody else, right? And then like who they're going to choose to have him interacting with. I'm interested to see that. I'm interested to see in how the character of Matt Murdock explores this sort of renewed lease on life, and like whether he thinks I've been granted a second chance, I've got to do better, I've got to not blow this, or whether he spends a large portion of it dazed and confused and not knowing like should I put the mask back on? Does the world need me? Am I irrelevant in the face of a bulletproof superhero, somebody with super strength, and somebody who's fist glows and he knows martial arts, and I guess that's a thing too. Like,
Yeah.
like I think that could be very interesting if season 3 of Daredevil is actually the existential crisis of Matt Murdock post mortem, right? Because he knows he should have died, and exploring that. I don't know how much they can. I don't know how much navel gazing they can get out of it, but I think they could get a couple of things out of it, at least a couple episodes.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially because, well, one thing is we kept saying before, or you convinced me that a big part of Danny's motivation is that he's trying to save Elektra.
Mm-hmm.
So what if Elektra actually is dead, and now he's got to wrestle with that? Like
Big part
that
of
could
big part of
be,
Matt's motivation. You mean?
yeah, big the
Unless
mass
you're telling
motivation.
me Iron Fist spoilers, in which case.
Oh no! Oh God! No! Sorry. No, that's I messed up the words there. No. Yeah, Matt Murdock. A big part of Matt's motivation was to try and save Elektra, emotionally and intellectually and morally. And so what if he got her killed?
Right.
I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore. And you're right. I think one of the things that is both I love and sometimes a little frustrating about Matt Murdock is we don't really quite know the extent to which he has supernatural senses because of the radiation of the accident that happened, or if he just is the way many people are. If they lose one sense, that others become very developed. I mean, the degree to which he sees the entire world through hearing, he basically has sonar, I think is
Mm-hmm.
from blind people I've spoken to, far beyond anything that any blind person has ever had. But they're never quite clear on, is that just because Stick trained him so well, or is his hearing kind of supernatural? But even if he has kind of super senses, you're right. He's either a non-powered individual or his powers are much lower on the scale than any of the rest of the Defenders. And the fact that he died, or at least almost died, that you're right. I think there's a really interesting story to explore there about him saying, like, maybe I'm not quite the person to mix it up with these folks. Although, as I say that, I'm remembering something that the show hasn't explored much, but I know is so central to the comics, is he's the man without fear. And on some level, like, I'd like to see them explore that. On the other hand, I feel like that would now be such a departure from the comic book character
Mm-hmm.
that I don't know if they would ever do that.
Yeah.
So let's, I think that's going to be kind of wrapping it up. I think, my only kind of last things that I would say is I'm really looking forward to him and Foggy being back. I'm really looking forward to, if they are, I really hope they are. I'm really looking forward to more of the, not that the Catholic priest is going to come back, but more of those kind of scenes of Matt wrestling with his conscience, of Matt trying to decide how much he can or cannot be on one side of the law or the other. It's funny. We've been talking with Jessica, who was our Jessica Plummer, who was our guest on an episode a while ago about the Punisher. She is a huge Superman fan, and we've been Jacob, you and I have been talking about how I've been talking with her about getting her on for an episode to talk about Superman and Batman and how the two of them are kind of at different ends of the spectrum of how much you work within or outside of the law in the fight for justice. Matt Murdock to me is kind of perfectly in between those two, being pulled in both directions. And I love Daredevil because I think that's my favorite moral question about superheroes, and I would just really like to see us explore that a lot more. I feel like I've made a lot of comments about how much I disliked the sort of zombie ninjas at the end of The Hand, but I think one of the reasons is because once they're undead, once they're kind of dead people who've been brought back to life through hand magic, there's no more ethical problem with killing them.
Right.
And I think that took away such an interesting part of his character.
Yeah, and something that, like, his struggle with that, his scenes with the priest, his talking with people who knew about his, this is the conflict, this is what he's wrestling with. That was a big part of what made the Matt Murdock character so compelling for me, because I feel like there's a universe where he has to make the decision to end a life rather than letting them continue doing what they're doing. And up to this point, I don't think he's really had to make that call. He's always been able to find some other way to go about it. And I don't know if he wants to cross that line ever. I would love to see a scene where he has the option to end, like, he thinks, okay, it's probably better to just end this person's life, and still just chooses not to because because he struggles with the fact that, like, well, I felt this way about Elektra and I still am not sure I was right there. Right? And he can't bring it upon himself to be the one to make the call.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely think that that's a really good one. Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff. We've got 2 weeks. I know you haven't even gone through Iron Fist yet, and I tend to watch things fast with you because for full disclosure, I work from home and Jacob doesn't, so I often have a lot more time to burn through a lot of this stuff, which is why often we tend to sometimes get to things with a little more reflection time. I like to, sometimes we're going to have episodes come out right when a show or a movie comes out, but sometimes we're going to have it come out a couple weeks or a couple months later. I'm guessing that you're not going to wait too long on Daredevil, and we're going to get to it pretty soon, but we'll see what happens, because schedules can be a while. So
I mean, as soon as I'm done with Luke Cage, it's on to Iron Fist, and as soon as we're done with Iron Fist, it's on to Daredevil, so...
Nice.
But just chewing through it, like, one episode at a time. I don't really binge watch these things. I don't have the time. Sorry, everybody, if I sound exhausted, it's because I am.
No, understandable. There's a lot we're both doing other times. But we can. So I hope everyone's looking forward to watching the new season of Daredevil. And stay tuned. I'm sure we're going to be talking about Luke Cage. We're going to be talking about Iron Fist, and we will be talking about Daredevil at some point. But for our next episode, we are going very far outside of the Marvel Universe, and we're going to a completely different time. In fact, we're going several hundred years into the future. We are going to be talking about Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. This might sound like a bit of a departure for an ethics podcast, and I admit part of why we're going to do this is because that's just such a great, badass movie. Mm-hmm. But you and I were talking that... we did this with Ender's Game a while ago, where we watched a movie and then just immediately afterwards talked about it.
We did it with Ready Player One.
We did it with Ready Player One, that's correct. I'm sorry.
We did not do it with Ender's Game.
I associate those movies and books together for a lot of reasons that we've discussed already. But yeah, and I think this is another, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get together, we're going to watch that movie, and then immediately afterwards we're going to talk about it. And knowing us, we'll probably spend a little bit of time talking about what just makes it such a great movie, and the fact that it's, amusingly enough, probably the best submarine warfare movie ever made, which is really odd for a Star Trek movie. but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But I do think that it isn't a movie that brings up a lot of great questions about revenge and about punishment, and I mean so much. Not to spoil it, but I'll be very careful to say this in a non-spoilery way. But a central part of the movie is the fact that 20 years ago, one of our heroes tried to humanely deal with a villain, and now the villain is back, and they're questioning how they tried to deal with the villain. And it brings up issues of aging, and what does it mean to sort of be no longer the people you once were, and fathers and sons, and a topic you and I both love to get into. So, yeah, I don't know how you're feeling about it, but I'm really excited for that episode.
So there's also themes of sacrifice in Wrath of Khan. There's also,
yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah, so there's also this whole thing about the ethical use of scientific developments and the responsibility of the military to not take them. And oh man, it's so good.
There's so much there we're going to chew on, and I'm saying this to you all both to get you a little excited about it, but also to say we love the audience interaction, and we sort of do it at the end, but we love to start it on the other side. So if that's a favorite movie of yours, what's a question you'd love us to explore? What's a point of view you have on one of those questions you'd love us to read and to talk about? Please let us know. As always, the best way to do that, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Superhero Ethics. We have now, there's a Superhero Ethics page, but the much better way to get these conversations going is the Superhero Ethics group. It's a slow process to shift it over, and I know a lot of folks haven't made that shift yet, but if you can find the Superhero Ethics group, the link will be in the show notes to this episode. Join that group. It's going to be where we're trying to really start discussions like this about Daredevil, about Wrath of Khan, about all the things that are going on. It's a great way to stay in touch with us. But you can also tweet at us, as I said, at Superhero Ethics. You can email us at superheroethics@gmail.com. And any of those ways, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys, everyone, for tuning in. Please also let us know what you think about this and what you're looking forward to for Daredevil. And on behalf of myself and Jacob, thank you guys all. Have a great day.
Take care.